Let's start with something fundamental, something often overlooked in our fast-moving, image-obsessed world. You were never an accident, not biologically, not psychologically, not cosmically. And I don't say that in a sentimental, motivational sense. I mean it with as much intellectual and existential weight as I can possibly convey. If you think about the probability of you existing as you are, the exact genetic code, the specific circumstances that led to your birth, the history of decisions and consequences that shaped your path, it's astronomical. The odds are incalculable. And yet, here you are. Not just alive, not just functioning, but conscious, capable of perceiving yourself, capable of suffering, yes, but also of insight, of love, of truth. That alone is staggering. That alone should make you stop and reorient the way you see your very presence on this planet. People get caught in this narrative that they're just one person, like their life doesn't matter unless it's broadcasted, celebrated, followed, or approved. But that's an illusion manufactured by a culture that profits off your insecurity. The truth is, if you vanished from the world tomorrow, the ripple would be undeniable to those close to you, obviously, but also to the structure of reality itself. Because every choice you've made, every interaction, every moment of awareness has shaped the trajectory of what we call the future. And you cannot extract that from the world and pretend nothing happened. Existence is not neutral. It's not static. It's always moving towards something. And your role in it, no matter how lost or disoriented you might feel, is active. You influence reality simply by being in it. That's not New Age fluff. That's metaphysical truth. And if you take it seriously, you start to realize something else. Your life is a responsibility, not a burden, not a punishment, but a responsibility in the deepest philosophical sense of the word. You are responsible. You are capable of responding to life, of acting within it, of choosing how to orient yourself in relation to it. And that's what power is. Not dominance, not aggression, not fame or force, but the ability to shape your own trajectory consciously, intentionally, to participate in existence with awareness instead of sleepwalking through it. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, but I've wasted so much time, or I've made too many mistakes, let me challenge that directly. There is no wasted time when the mind becomes aware. The second you become conscious of your agency, even if you've lived 30, 40, 60 years without it, you're in the game. You've remembered the fundamental truth that you matter, not because of your resume, not because of your image, but because of your being. Your being is power. That's why people are drawn to authenticity and repelled by performance. That's why a single person standing in truth can shift the emotional and moral climate of an entire room. That's why your internal transformation can trigger external chaos, because when someone steps into their full existence, when they stop apologizing for it, the false structures around them begin to crack. It's not comfortable, but it's real. And that's the trade-off. Power isn't ease. Power is truth. And truth costs. You'll find that the moment you begin to take your existence seriously, people will either start to deeply respect you or become intensely uncomfortable around you. That's the paradox, because people aren't used to encountering others who have remembered who they are. It forces them to confront where they're still asleep, and that confrontation is rarely welcomed with open arms. But your job isn't to be digestible. Your job isn't to be palatable. Your job is to be fully, unapologetically, relentlessly. And that doesn't mean being loud or aggressive or performative. It means being aligned, grounded, aware. It means acting not from fear, but from clarity. It means carrying yourself like someone who understands that every breath they take shapes the future in ways they may never fully grasp. I want you to sit with this. Your very presence has altered the course of reality. Let that sink in. You've had conversations that changed someone's mental state. You've made decisions that prevented or caused chain reactions you'll never see. You've been witnessed by others who remembered something vital about themselves just by observing you. And you've forgotten your power not because it disappeared, but because the world convinced you to disown it, to file it down, to shrink. No more. That story ends the moment you decide to remember. You don't need permission to be powerful. You need awareness. And you have that now. So use it. Shape something. Say something true. Walk into rooms like your soul belongs there, because it does. Even if you're still healing, even if you're still confused, even if you don't feel ready, here's the uncomfortable truth. Readiness is a myth. No one feels ready to embody their full existence. But you don't need to feel ready to act. You just need to decide that your life matters enough to be lived with intention right now, not someday, because every second you wait is a second you've lent to a world that profits from your amnesia. So remember, stand up, speak out, live on purpose. You were never an accident. You were always the spark. Now light the damn fire. Let's talk about something almost no one is brave enough to say out loud in a culture obsessed with surface level affirmation. The reason you feel lost is because you've betrayed yourself again and again. And that's not an accusation. It's a call to wake up. Because that inner ache, that sense of disconnection, of floating, of being unmoored, it doesn't come out of nowhere. It's not just bad luck or poor timing. It's the inevitable consequence of abandoning your truth for the sake of approval, comfort, or avoidance. Now, I'm not saying you set out to do that consciously. Most people don't. But little by little, you learned to edit yourself. You learned to silence that inner voice, the one that said, no, this isn't right, or that's not who I am. You quieted it for the sake of fitting in, of being liked, of avoiding confrontation. And every time you did that, you carved a little piece off yourself and handed it to someone else. And at first, it seems harmless. It even feels like the mature thing to do. Go along, don't rock the boat, keep the peace. But over time, you realize you've become a stranger to yourself. You look in the mirror and don't quite recognize who's looking back. This is the paradox of self-betrayal. You do it to belong, but the more you do it, the more isolated you become, because no one can truly connect with you if you're not even connected to yourself. They're engaging with a performance, not a person. And the real tragedy? Some people go their whole lives like this, choosing the illusion of peace over the reality of integrity. But here's the thing. You can't build a meaningful life on a foundation of lies, even small ones. Eventually, the cracks will show. So what do? We reverse the process. We stop the bleeding. We confront the truth, however uncomfortable it is, and we start honoring our inner compass again. And that begins with awareness. You can't correct what you won't confront. You have to look at the moments, big and small, where you've said yes when you meant no, where you kept silent when something inside you was screaming to speak, where you wore a mask because the real you felt too risky to reveal. That's not easy work. It requires brutal honesty. It requires courage. But more than anything, it requires humility. The kind of humility that says, I've made choices that hurt me, and now I'm ready to stop. Not because you're a failure, but because you're finally remembering your value. You're finally understanding that your inner voice isn't a nuisance, it's a compass. And every time you betray it, you step off course. Now, let me be clear. This doesn't mean you become selfish or reckless. Quite the opposite. True self-loyalty doesn't make you harder. It makes you more real. And real people, when they operate from a place of alignment, are better partners, better friends, better leaders, because they're not playing games. They're not manipulating or pretending. They are clear. And clarity is one of the most powerful forces in the world. But to get there, you've got to stop outsourcing your integrity. You have to stop looking to others for permission to be yourself. Because the truth is, no one is coming to save you from your own inauthenticity. That's your job. And the good news is, you can do it. You're already doing it. The fact that you're listening, reflecting, questioning, that's the beginning. That's the signal that the spell is breaking. And once you've seen the truth, you can't unsee it. You might try to go back to sleep. You might be tempted to retreat into the old habits, the old roles, the old scripts, but they won't fit anymore because you've outgrown them. That's the cost of awakening. You lose your tolerance for your own dishonesty, but what you gain in return is far more valuable: self-respect. And that's the cornerstone of any powerful life. Not ego, not arrogance, but a quiet, unshakable sense of, I know who I am, I know what matters to me, and I will no longer abandon myself to keep others comfortable. Because when you stop betraying yourself, everything changes. Your relationships change, your decisions change, your energy changes. You start drawing boundaries not out of fear, but out of clarity. You start speaking truth not to hurt, but to heal. You become someone people can trust, not because you're perfect, but because you're real. And let me tell you, realness is rare, but it's magnetic. People are starving for it. They're tired of the performance. They're tired of the noise. And when you show up with your soul intact, when you refuse to play the game, you give others permission to do the same. So don't underestimate the ripple effect of your own self-loyalty. It's not just about you, it's about what you model. It's about what you embody. Because the world doesn't need more agreeable people. It needs more authentic ones. People who have remembered who they are and who refuse to betray it for anything. You want to stop feeling lost? Stop walking away from yourself. The road back to you starts the moment you stop lying to yourself. Don't wait. Begin now. Here's what most people don't realize. Identity isn't something you simply have. It's something you practice every day through your habits, your choices, the things you tolerate, and the things you refuse to. You don't find yourself once and then you're done. You become yourself again and again. And one of the most powerful ways we do that is by rebuilding our identity through consistent action, especially after we've been lost. When you feel like you've lost yourself, it's tempting to wait for clarity before taking action. You want certainty. You want some grand vision of who you're supposed to be before you move. But that's not how it works. Clarity doesn't precede action. It follows it. You don't think your way into a new identity. You act your way into it through small, repeated, and intentional behaviors that align with who you want to become, not who you've been. Now, this is psychologically profound because it flips the narrative. Most of us are conditioned to believe that we need to feel motivated, inspired, or ready before we do the thing that could change our lives. But waiting for motivation is just another form of avoidance. Discipline is what builds identity, not fleeting emotion. You don't wake up one morning with a solid self. You forge it through commitment, through integrity, through doing what's difficult, especially when it doesn't feel good in the moment. And it doesn't have to be huge. In fact, it shouldn't be at first. If you're rebuilding a fractured sense of self, the worst thing you can do is overwhelm your nervous system by trying to change everything overnight. You don't need to become a different person tomorrow. What you need to do is take one meaningful action today, an action that aligns with the person you want to become. Maybe it's telling the truth instead of hiding. Maybe it's setting a boundary. Maybe it's putting your phone down and going for a walk without needing to numb out. Small, high-integrity actions done repeatedly begin to whisper to your subconscious, "This is who I am now," and identity starts to shift. There's a psychological term for this, self-signaling. It's the idea that your brain is always watching you. You're teaching yourself who you are based on what you do. If you constantly abandon your goals, your mind learns, "I'm not someone who follows through." If you keep tolerating mistreatment, it learns, "I must not be worth protecting." But if you show up day after day for what matters, even imperfectly, your mind rewrites the script. I'm someone who does hard things. I'm someone who values the truth. I'm someone who honors myself. And that changes everything. Think about this. Every action you take is a vote for the kind of person you're becoming. So the question is, what are you voting for today? Who are you casting ballots for with your time, your energy, your attention? Because if you're consistently voting for a version of you that's passive, avoidant, or resentful, then that's the identity that's going to win. Not because it's who you are, but because it's what you're rehearsing. We become what we practice. That's not just philosophy, it's neuroscience. The brain wires itself according to repeated experience. The more you choose courage, the more natural courage becomes. The more you choose avoidance, the easier it gets to disappear. So if you want to feel different, if you want to feel strong, centered, real, you have to act like someone who is. Not once, but consistently, not for performance, but because your soul depends on it. And here's the brutal truth. No one else is going to do this for you. No one's coming with a checklist to rebuild your identity. That's your job. That's your responsibility, but also your privilege. Because once you realize that identity is not fixed, that you're not bound by who you've been or what you've tolerated, you reclaim an enormous amount of power. You stop being a victim of your story, you become the author. But you have to write the next chapter with your actions, not just your hopes. So start where you are. Don't wait for the perfect moment or the right mood. Don't wait until you feel like it. Begin now with something small, something doable, something honest, and then do it again tomorrow and the day after that. Because every time you follow through, even in tiny ways, you send a signal in rebuilding. I remember who I am. And slowly the fog lifts, the heaviness lessens. You start to trust yourself again, not because someone told you to, but because you earned it through effort, through consistency, through action. You want to find yourself? Then build yourself, brick by brick, with your own two hands. Nothing could be more real or more powerful. When you've lost yourself, when you're standing in the ruins of your former clarity and conviction, there's an overwhelming temptation to think your way out of the hole, to overanalyze your history, trace every step that led you to this point, attempt to understand in obsessive detail why things broke down. And there's a place for that, yes. Reflection has its value, but at some point, reflection turns into paralysis, into rumination, into spinning your wheels in the mud, telling yourself that if you just understand more, then you'll be able to move forward. That's a lie. One of the most seductive lies the mind offers. You don't think your way out of the abyss, you act your way out. See, in times of disorientation, clarity doesn't come from more mental gymnastics. It comes from aligning with truth, from speaking truth, from acting in truth, from living truth. And that begins with a simple, difficult, almost sacred act: radical honesty. Not performative vulnerability, not curated transparency. I'm talking about truthfulness in its rawest, most uncomfortable form, with yourself first, and then with the world. Most people have no idea how much they lie to themselves. They justify bad relationships. They excuse their own apathy. They rewrite the past so it doesn't hurt so much. They call it coping. They call it healing, but really it's avoidance. And avoidance is the enemy of identity, because every time you lie to yourself, even subtly, even silently, you fracture your internal compass. You teach your psyche that comfort is more valuable than reality, that the pain of truth is too much to bear. And so you build your life around illusions, fragile, unstable illusions, and then wonder why everything feels hollow. If you want to find yourself again, you start by telling the truth. What are you pretending not to know? Where have you been dishonest? Where are you out of alignment, not because someone told you so, but because you know? You can feel it in your gut, that twist of unease, that twinge of shame, that subtle numbness. Those are signals. They're the body's way of saying something here isn't true. And here's the paradox. The moment you start speaking truth, everything gets harder. For a little while, relationships crack, comfort disappears, people you once leaned on may not recognize you anymore. But that's the price of authenticity. It's not free, it costs. But what you gain is priceless. Integrity, congruence, self-respect. And without those, you'll never feel whole. No matter how much therapy you go to, how many books you read, or how many affirmations you tape to your mirror. The truth hurts, but it also heals. And it doesn't just heal the surface, it restructures you from the inside out, because truth builds order, and order is what the psyche craves. Not control, not perfection, order, meaningful structure, a sense that your internal world isn't at war with itself. And once that order starts to emerge, so does clarity. You start to see where you were out of bounds, where you abandoned yourself, where you outsourced your authority, and from there you begin the work of reconstruction, not as a victim, but as a sovereign. It's also important to say this: speaking the truth doesn't mean being harsh. It doesn't mean you bulldoze others with your realizations. Real honesty is humble, it's quiet, it's responsible. You speak it not to destroy, but to reveal, not to prove anything, but to come back into alignment. Because what you're trying to build is a self that you can trust. And trust is built in truth, not in ease, not in comfort, not in superficial peace. And there's one more thing. Truth doesn't just reorient you, it reorders your environment. When you begin to act in integrity, the world responds. Not always gently, not always in the way you hoped, but it does respond. Relationships shift, opportunities open or close. The right people begin to notice you, not the mask, not the performance, but the real you. And that's terrifying, but it's also the only way to live something real. So if you're feeling lost, if you don't recognize yourself anymore, stop asking others who you are. Stop waiting for some external validation. Look inward. Ask yourself the most difficult question of all. Where have I abandoned the truth? And then, gently but firmly, start returning to it. Not all at once, not perfectly, but persistently. Speak the truth in small moments. Act in ways that align with what you know, even if they're inconvenient or scary, especially then, because each act of truth is a step home to yourself. And you're not going to find your way back through fantasy or escape or people-pleasing. You find your way back through fire, by walking through the discomfort of honesty until you come out the other side, real, whole, respected by you. So let's be clear. The path to finding yourself again isn't paved with comfort. It's paved with truth. And yes, it's hard, but it's also the only path worth walking. Say what is true, do what is right, and watch who you become. There's a strange paradox in the process of rediscovering yourself. To find who you truly are, you have to let go of who you thought you were. And that's not easy. Most people cling to their old identity because it's familiar. It gives them a sense of security, even if that security is built on suffering. The idea that we must constantly remain who we've always been is one of the most dangerous illusions we buy into. See, identity isn't static. It's not a fixed point in time. It's a process, an unfolding narrative that is always being written. But many people trap themselves in outdated chapters of their own story. They hold on to beliefs, behaviors, and labels that no longer serve them, simply because those elements were once necessary for survival. But survival is not the same as living. And if you don't evolve past your survival strategies, you eventually become a prisoner of them. Think about that. The very traits that helped you get through a painful season, numbing yourself, staying small, avoiding confrontation, might be the exact traits now keeping you from healing, from expanding, from becoming. This is why transformation often feels like death, because something does have to die. The illusion, the mask, the identity that was shaped by pain, not by purpose. You don't find yourself by doubling down on an image of yourself that was never authentic to begin with. You find yourself by stripping that image away. And that requires courage. It requires a willingness to step into uncertainty, to admit you don't fully know who you are yet, but you're willing to find out. That's the psychological edge where growth begins. One of the most liberating truths you can accept is this: you are under no obligation to remain the person you were 5 minutes ago, let alone 5 years ago. Just because you once identified as broken, lost, anxious, angry, doesn't mean that's who you are. It means that's who you had to be to navigate the terrain you were in. But terrain changes, and so must you. So many people sabotage their evolution because they are loyal to a version of themselves that no longer fits. They worry what others will think if they change. They fear the loss of relationships built on dysfunction. They fear being seen as inauthentic for evolving. But let's be clear. There is nothing more authentic than growth, than choosing to align with a deeper truth, even if it means walking away from comfort, from familiarity, from approval. If you're trying to reclaim your identity after losing yourself, you have to be willing to break the mold you've been living in. And the moment you do that, when you stop pretending, stop performing, and allow yourself to be redefined by who you're becoming rather than who you've been, everything begins to shift. You feel less fragmented, less anxious, because now you're not fighting yourself. You're not betraying yourself to keep an old version of you alive. The psychological toll of self-betrayal is enormous. It leads to chronic anxiety, depression, fatigue, even resentment, because some part of you knows you're not being honest, not with the world and not with yourself. That inner tension, that restlessness you feel, it's your potential trying to wake you up. It's the future version of you knocking on the door, asking you to stop hiding behind old limitations. So how do you start letting go of that outdated identity? You begin with brutal honesty. You examine what roles you've been playing, what masks you've been wearing, and ask, are these aligned with my truth, or are they just echoes of who I had to be to survive? Then you decide. You decide to shed what no longer fits, even if it feels like loss, because in truth it's liberation. And don't make the mistake of thinking this is a one-time decision. It's a practice, a discipline. You'll have to recommit to it every day. You'll face pressure, internal and external, to go back to your old ways, to stay in the box, to keep playing the character. But each time you choose to be real over being comfortable, you reclaim a little more of your power, a little more of your integrity, and that builds momentum, that rewires your sense of self. Eventually, you'll stop recognizing the person you once were. And that's not a tragedy. That's a triumph. That means the work is working. That means you've stopped living in reaction to your past and started living in alignment with your potential. Letting go of who you were isn't betrayal. It's the most honest form of self-respect there is. You are not here to live a rerun of yesterday. You're here to write something new, something worthy, something true. If you want to find yourself again, don't look backward, break the mold, and become someone your past self wouldn't even recognize. That's how you know you're on the right path. You want to reclaim yourself? Then here's the hard truth. You're going to have to learn how to stand alone. And that's not romantic, it's not poetic, it's brutal, it's isolating, and it's absolutely necessary. Because no one is coming to hand you your identity. No one is going to wake you up at 6 a.m., drag you out of bed, sit you down, and tell you who you were meant to be. You have to do that work yourself. You have to wrestle with the silence. You have to confront the void and ask what's in here that's real. Most people will never do that. They'd rather distract themselves, numb the discomfort with noise, validation, substances, scrolling, overworking, anything but stillness, anything but solitude, because silence makes them uneasy. It threatens their illusion of self. But silence is precisely where the truth lives. Solitude is not a punishment, it's a proving ground. If you're serious about finding yourself, truly, not just in a surface level, self-help kind of way, you must become someone who can be alone without falling apart. You have to be able to hear your own thoughts, feel your own emotions, and not immediately rush to escape them. That's a form of strength most people never develop, and without it, your identity will always be subject to the people around you. You'll mold yourself to fit their expectations, their approval, their comfort zones. You'll be everyone but yourself, and let's be honest, that's a slow spiritual death. That's the hollow kind of existence that leaves you lying awake at 2 a.m., wondering why you feel so disconnected, so lost, even when you've checked off all the boxes society told you would make you enough. It's because you've outsourced your identity. You've built your sense of self on external scaffolding, and as soon as those structures fall, when the relationship ends, the job disappears, the admiration fades, so do you. You want to be unshakable? Learn how to be alone without being lonely. Learn to be with your thoughts and not fear them. That's where your core is forged. That's how you become sovereign. And this isn't about becoming some stoic hermit. This isn't about rejecting connection. It's about ensuring that when you do connect, you're doing it from a place of wholeness, not dependency. You're not attaching to fill a void. You're engaging from a sense of overflow. And here's the kicker. Once you cultivate that inner stability, the world begins to respond to you differently. Because now you're not reacting to life. You're generating it. You walk into a room and you're not seeking permission to exist. You've already given it to yourself. That kind of presence is magnetic. It commands respect, not because you're loud, but because you're clear. Clear on who you are, what you value, what you will and won't tolerate. But clarity like that only comes when you strip everything else away, when you stop performing, when you sit in the discomfort of your own becoming. It's in that furnace of solitude that character is built, and it's there you start hearing your own voice again, beneath the conditioning, beneath the trauma, beneath the noise. That's you. Not the version of you your parents wanted, not the persona you created to survive high school, not the mask you wear to fit in at work. You, the part of you that's been there all along, waiting for you to come home. And when you reconnect with that voice, even faintly, you begin to move differently, not out of fear or obligation, but out of alignment, out of authenticity. The irony is, once you become that grounded, that whole, you'll start attracting people who actually see you, who resonate with you, who support, not sabotage your growth. But even then, you won't need them to feel complete, and that's the difference. That's the power of standing alone first. You stop entering relationships as a half looking for a whole. You show up as a whole looking to share, and that changes everything. Now, none of this is easy. I'm not pretending it is. Facing yourself is the most difficult task you'll ever undertake. It's terrifying, it's destabilizing, but it's also the beginning of true freedom. Because once you've gone through that fire, once you've stood in the silence and refused to abandon yourself, nothing can take your identity away again. No betrayal, no failure, no rejection, because now it's rooted inside you. You've become the foundation, and that is what it means to find yourself. So if you're serious about reclaiming who you are, turn down the volume of the world and listen. Get still, get quiet, and meet yourself again. Because the truth is, you were never really lost. You were just distracted.